Did you know that Alabama has been leasing prisoners for profit? And they're not the only ones that are doing this, but it seems as though Alabama is doing this the most when compared to any other state. Let's look at this report that came from AP, and I want to dive into this first, then we'll get to Alabama. Prisoners in the U.S. are part of a hidden workforce that is linked to hundreds of popular food brands. So hold on to your food, ladies and gentlemen. I don't want you to freak out when you see who these giants are. Unmarked trucks packed with prison-raised cattle roll out of the Louisiana State Penitentiary, where men are sentenced to hard labor and forced to work for pennies an hour or sometimes nothing at all. After rumbling down a country road to an auction house, the cows are bought by a local rancher and then followed by the Associated Press, another 600 miles to a Texas slaughterhouse that feeds into the supply chains of giants like McDonald's, Walmart, and Cargill. McDonald's, Walmart, and Cargill. That's just to name a few. Intricate, invincible webs, just like this one, like some of the world's largest food companies and most popular brands, to jobs performed by the U.S. prisoners nationwide. According to a sweeping 2-year AP investigation into prison labor that tied hundreds of millions of dollars worth of agricultural products to goods sold on the open market. They are among America's most vulnerable laborers. If they refuse to work, some can jeopardize their chances of parole or face punishment like being sent to solitary confinement. They are also often excluded from protections guaranteed to almost all other full-time workers, even when they are seriously injured or killed on the job. Now, some of you are already probably wondering, how was this allowed to happen? We're going to get to that in just a second. That's Louisiana, but it's this Alabama situation that is getting all the buzz. I want to bring this piece in here. Alabama profits off of prisoners who work at McDonald's, but deems them too dangerous for parole. So some of you may not have known this. I haven't eaten at McDonald's in a long time. I really don't like McDonald's. When I was a kid, McDonald's fries actually taste pretty good. But as I got older, those fries started to taste like cardboard. So I haven't eaten at McDonald's in a while. But how many of you knew that there were prisoners working at McDonald's? You would know. I mean, it's not like they would have a name tag that says, "Hi, I'm a prisoner." How many of you knew that? Let's get into this story because this is crazy and I want more people to call this out. So here's an example that happened recently. It says a storm was looming when the inmate serving 20 years for armed robbery was assigned to transport fellow prisoners to their jobs at private manufacturers supplying goods to companies like Home Depot and Wayfair. Here's 2 other businesses here. It didn't matter that Jake Jones once had escaped or that he failed 2 drug or alcohol tests while in lockup. He was unsupervised and technically in charge. Pause right there. So it's okay for them to be unsupervised and in charge when it comes to forced labor. And we say forced, they are not choosing to do this, but it's not okay for them to be brought back into society and have rehabilitation the way that it really should be done. Let's continue. By the time that Jones was driving back to work, to the work release center with 6 other incarcerated workers, it was pelting rain. Jones had a reputation for driving fast, and some of his passengers said he was racing along the country road, jamming the music in his earbuds. And suddenly the transport van hit a dip and swerved on the wet pavement, slamming into a tree. Here's the picture here of the accident that you can see. 2 men died after being thrown out of the van, and Jones, who was critically hurt and slumped over the blaring horn, had to be cut out of the vehicle. They had to cut him out of the car. As the other man staggered into the storm to flag down help, they wondered, why would the Alabama Department of Corrections place their lives in Jones' hands? They knew he had a propensity to drink, said Sean Waston, who survived the crash, and they put him behind the wheel of the van anyway. No state has a longer, more profit-driven history of contracting prisoners out to private companies than Alabama. With a sprawling labor system that dates back more than 150 years, including the brutal convict leasing era that replaced slavery, it has constructed a template for the commercialization of mass incarceration. You can see the pictures here. The picture here on the left, it says this is August 10th, 1909. That's a photo that shows convicts engaged in street repair on 24th Street. That's in Birmingham, Alabama. And then you can see here, July 1907 is a photo of city convicts in their sleeping quarters in Birmingham, Alabama. Let's go down here. And you can see the chains that were used. Best Western, Bama Budweiser, and Burger King are among more than 500 businesses that lease incarcerated workers from one of the most violent, overcrowded, and unruly prison systems in the U.S. in the past 5 years alone. The Associated Press, as part of their 2-year investigation into prison labor, the cheap, reliable labor force has generated more than $250 million for the state since 2000 through money garnished from prisoners' paychecks. We're highlighting $250 million for the state. In other words, ladies and gentlemen, the state of Alabama has been able to generate over $250 million off of slave labor, because that's what this is. You remember a while back, I told you that Kamala Harris, at one point, before she was in the Senate, that she was already told by a judge that the prisons in California were overcrowded. She was using the prison system in California for free labor, slave labor. But she wasn't alone. Now you hear this story here about Alabama. And some of you may be wondering, like, how is this legal? How is it legal to make someone do labor and not pay them? Well, that goes back to the 13th Amendment. We'll get to that in just a second. There's no way in hell this should be allowed to happen in this country, in the wealthiest country in the world. Tonight, the spotlight is on Alabama, but you have to understand it's not the only state that's doing this. Most jobs inside facilities where the state's inmates who are disproportionately Black can be sentenced to hard labor and forced to work for free, doing everything from mopping floors to laundry. But more than 10,000 inmates have logged a combined 17 million work hours outside Alabama's prison walls since 2018. This is for entities like city and county governments and businesses that range from major car part manufacturers and meat processing plants to distribution centers for major retailers like Walmart. Now I'm going to ask you guys a question. If you know that there is an incentive to lock up more people because it can produce more labor for free, you're going to take advantage of that incentive. Their goal is to keep the prisons full, not to keep the prisons empty. This doesn't mean that everybody there didn't do a crime. That's not what I'm saying. What I am saying is that some of these people that have been in prison, if you go back and you look at some of these cases, some of these people didn't deserve to be there in the first place. We already talked about the situation before about the kids for cash scam, where judges were paid to put kids behind bars in juvie for cash. They just because of money. I'll do it because I'm paid. That's it. This is a part of the prison profit industry. This is why I continue to say that for-profit prisons have to end. So there's an incentive here. And Walmart, I'm looking at you. McDonald's, I'm looking at you. They're not alone. There's many more. Total work that is done by prisoners. Look at this. Aggravated work release logs obtained from the Alabama Department of Corrections. This goes through March 2024, starts in 2018. Look at all of this. Dorsey Trailers, Cass Productions Incorporated, Progressive Finishes First, Van Driver, Shelby County Environmental, Kith Kitchens, Haleyville, Masonite, Kith Furniture, Bear Creek, Ju Young, C.R. Gibson. Look at all of this. Over 260,000 labor hours for Dorsey Trailers alone. This is free labor. They don't have to pay these people. While those working at private companies can at least earn a little money, they face possible punishment if they refuse, from being denied family visits to being sent to a higher security prison. Obviously, we know the higher security prisons are more dangerous for the prisoner. Though they make at least $7.25 an hour, and this is some, the state siphons 40% off the top of the wages and also levies fees, including $5 a day for rides to their jobs and $15 a month for laundry. So let me get this straight. I'm forcing you to do this job. If you get paid, I'm paying you $7.25 an hour, but I'm also going to take a 40% cut off of that, and I'm going to charge you levy fees and $5 a day for rides. How much are you actually making? How is this allowed? This is why it's important that we have to pay attention to what some of these amendments actually say. Turning down work can jeopardize chances of early release in a state that last year granted parole to only 8% of eligible prisoners, an all-time low, and among the worst rates nationwide, though that number more than doubled this year after public outcry. It is a symptom of a completely, utterly broken system. That's coming from Chris England, an Alabama lawmaker pushing for criminal justice reform. Many prisoners work 40 hours a week outside their facilities and then get weekend passes, allowing them to go home without any supervision or electronic monitoring. So when prisoners are then told they're too dangerous to be permanently released, England said it looks like another way to create a cheap labor force that is easily exploited and abused. And by the way, I don't want to say it looks like, that's what he said. I'm going to say it is this way. They want to create a cheap labor force that is easily exploited and abused. And that is exactly what they are doing. That's the corporations, once again, exploiting the people. And this has been going on for a long time. Alabama. So there is an incentive to lock people up. That's not just the police officer that arrests you. That's the police officer. That's the crappy ass lawyer that you get from the state. You know, when they say, if you can't afford a lawyer, well, then the state will provide one for you. Those lawyers suck. The police officer, the crappy lawyer from the state, and the judge. They're all in on it together. And the corporations are a part of this. So do you see what I mean when I say at the end of the day, if you follow the money, you'll get the answers to a lot of the questions that you have. Why do we have overcrowded prisons? Follow the money. Now, for those of you wondering, how are they allowed to do this? Because of the 13th Amendment. Listen to this.
So prisons in America specifically are some of the biggest, most dysfunctional businesses we have in our society. And they're business because of the cheap and free labor. When you read the 13th Amendment, that basically was the amendment that broke through slavery and freed the men and women who were enslaved at the time, there's a clause in there that allows for the re-enslavement of people in the event that they're convicted of a crime. And so in prisons throughout our country, you have people who are working for basically free. And if they're not working for free, they're working for wages that if we saw that happen in another country, we would be very critical of. When I was in prison, I worked for 17 cents an hour. That was my starting rate working in the kitchen.
Pause just right there. You see that clause in the 13th Amendment that says, oh, slavery is illegal unless you're in prison for a crime. That's how they get around it. And the fact that he was making 17 cents an hour, that's nothing, you guys. It doesn't matter. Get past the fact that they're in prison. That does not matter. The people are being used and abused. And all of this runs together. So you have for-profit prisons. You have cops that have obviously quotas that they tell them they have to meet. You have crooked ass judges that are paid off. It's all working exactly the way they designed it to work. So did slavery fully end? No, because they said that you can still do it if you are imprisoned.
But there's also big corporations who invest in prison labor because they can get this labor for $1.50 an hour. And then the sad part about it is that in turn, they don't even hire these men and women when they're actually released from prison. Everything in prison has inflated cost. You know, it costs us inside prison, when I was inside, anywhere between $3 and $15 for a 15-minute phone call. We don't have to pay that out here in free society. There's a way that we can send emails to men and women inside prison, and it costs 5 cents every time we send that. Whereas out here in society, we can send emails without any charge. And so there's so many ways that the prison is exploited, the cheap labor, the cost of services and goods. And it's a model that, you know, sadly and unfortunately has affected a large segment of our society. But I think most people aren't aware of why the business models of prison exist, because most of our society has been left clueless in regards to how our judicial system works. And it's largely been to the effective campaigns that politicians have ran for years. This whole idea that one of the greatest fears you should have is crime in America. And when you're operating out of a space of fear, you're not thinking clearly. So you're not willing to examine things that are right in front of us. And so the way that the prison system has developed and evolved over the year is it originally started as government-ran, state-ran institutions, and then people started seeing investment opportunities when the states couldn't keep up with the budgetary costs of incarcerating so many people. You know, we currently have over 2 million men and women incarcerated throughout the country. And we represent 5% of the world population, yet we incarcerate 25% of the world's incarcerated people. And so at some point, states could no longer keep up with those budgets. Private investors moved in and seized an opportunity. And then they started structuring laws in a way that ensured that people continue to be incarcerated for the most frivolous things. Like, 40 years ago, we didn't have as many laws on the books that we have now. And, you know, when you look at how the war on drugs itself impacted, you know, incarceration rates, you can follow, if you follow that pathway, you'll see how people seized on that opportunity to begin to invest in private businesses.
The war on drugs, and I'm so glad that he mentioned that. Let's go back to Joe Biden's crime bills as well. Is it all starting to make sense, ladies and gentlemen? Let's give harsher punishment for people who have possession of drugs. Obviously, that targeted black men, predominantly black men. Let's increase those penalties, increase the punishment. Because if you increase the punishment and you increase the penalty, then that means you're going to be in prison longer. Thus, you will give them longer labor. Now, instead of maybe having you for 5 years, they know they might have you for 20 years. That's 20 years of free labor. Everybody following me here? It's all connected. The crime bill, the war on drugs, the for-profit prisons, the legislation, the judges, the lawyers appointed to you by the state. They're all working together to continue to feed the capitalist system and to exploit the workers. All one big thing. They're all on the same team. They're not there to help you. They're not there to show any type of empathy or sympathy for your cause. Most of them really could give a damn. They are there to feed that labor into the corporations, into the capitalist system. So once again, if we follow the money, we will see that corporate interest and corporate greed controls, even when it comes to the prison, the criminal justice system, they control that as well. Please share this story about Alabama, you guys. Eric, you can put the link in the chat, that Alabama article, because that's been a 2-year investigation. Like, that didn't just happen overnight. And I just want more people to hear about that story because I don't think a lot of people know. Hey guys, this was a Sabby clip. If you like what you saw, hit that like button and subscribe.